So, the universe is made of stories, and I heard a lot of stories today. And I think your story, sir, was absolutely riveting. And we've heard some great stories of students who have really come from IIT. And I was just talking to the dean. I was telling him about, that we need to really encourage students to do better and to really come out with their own stories and how life can change that. So the topic today is that we are a story. Our lives are all about stories. And really, who we are is, at the end of the day, we are not really an atom, we are just made up of stories. And when I say that is because all of us have stories. Whether it's a story about our parents, whether it's a story about a girlfriend, whether it's a story about a partner, because she wants to be in a polyamorous relationship and you don't want to be, whether it's a story about the neighbor's wife, some interesting stories there as well. So we are a bunch of stories all the time, and the stories basically come from, and the most powerful story there is the story that we have about ourselves in that sense, because really what we think about ourselves and how we actually craft our lives, and we had some remarkable sharing today by this gentleman, that how we think about ourselves is how we actually shape our story, and the story of our lives is the most important part in there. And so what is the story of our lives really? The story of our lives really starts off, for me, it starts off with this guy called Viktor Frankl. I'm sure a lot of people before this, Aristotle, Plato, everybody has spoken about a lot of stories. But Viktor Frankl is a guy he was Dr. Viktor Frankl. He was a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst and a neurosurgeon. And he's a Holocaust victim survivor. Okay, and he came up with a logotherapy, which is about existential crisis or existential theory, which essentially meant that he came up with a theory after the Second World War and how he survived the Second World War and how he survived the concentration camp there. He came up with the theory that all people who actually had meaning in their lives, all people who had a story about their lives, all people who had a certain understanding and who had a certain vision or a story about themselves actually survived the concentration camps. Many of the others who did not have a story about themselves either died of depression or suicide or just out of despair and despondency. So really our story is important in there, that we have to have a story. And the important part to understand Dr. Frankl is the fact that the logotherapy is today the foundation of all understanding of all stories really in there. Because what we call in storytelling, what we call raison d'être, which is the French for reason to exist. We all need a reason to exist. And in that sense, my reason to exist has also come from a certain understanding of life and how I perceived it and how I actually see it. Now, where does the meaning of life come from? Meaning of life comes from our desire to actually make sense of disparate, absolutely ridiculous and absolutely preposterous points that happen in our life. When we are children, we are worried about the reason to exist is to maybe get an A grade or maybe to make sure that you retrieve your water bottle from somebody who has snatched it away from you. As you grow up, the reason to exist maybe changes to escape being punished by the teacher for something that you did, some misdemeanor, or reason to exist could be to come first in A class, and then when you grow up, the reason to exist keeps changing. So as you go through the stages of life, you will see that the reason to exist will keep changing. For you guys, most of you guys, the reason to exist today is to make sure you get a great job and to kind of really do well in life. And you can't see that ahead of you right now, but just go back 5 years and the reason to exist at 5 years ago was completely different from what it is today. So as you move forward in life, you will see that the reason to exist will keep changing. And as human beings, the creation of the universe itself is a very random sort of process. The universe may not have existed, as we know, but because of a certain antimatter-matter collision and a certain conjunction, the creation of the universe itself is an accident. And anything that is happening in life, a lot of things that are happening in our life is random. So then what is the reason to exist? The reason to exist is what is happening in the mind, which is that we are all meaning-making machines. At the end of the day, we want to connect the dots, and we want to connect everything that is happening in our lives. We want to connect whatever is happening in our lives, and we want to make sense out of what is going on, especially when things are going on, things are going wrong with us. And in that sense, I think it is important to understand that when we are meaning-making machines, we are constantly thinking about how we can make sense of it. And I will connect that to my life, because everybody is born without a slate. And then the meaning, they try to run for a meaning, or they try to find a meaning in life. Some people find meaning in life late, some people find meaning in life early. For me, I was lucky that I was born in a very, very privileged house. I was born in a very, very creative house. My father actually was the Indian animation pioneer, Bhim Sen. And he was somebody who was making films on empowerment. He was making films about humanity. He was making films about the human condition. And he was making films about something that helped society or empowered society in very, very interesting ways. And one of the first films that he made, The Climb, in 1970, was essentially about the condition of man, and it was about this relentless climb of a man with many, many, many millions of squares in there. And of course, this film was extremely popular, and it got him a lot of accolades. But many of the older people may recognize this film, which is the iconic film, which is the Ek Anek Ekta, which is the Ek Chidiya Anek Chidiya. This is the film that actually made him, and this was about national integration. So the national integration was something that was the theme of this film. And so he always made films that empowered people, and right from age 6, therefore, I had been brought up in that environment where empowering and telling stories that add meaning to somebody else's life. So when I came back from Canada, I actually wanted to empower the animation industry. One of the moves that I did was, of course, I worked with the industry to see how we can get this society formed, and which we did. But the other thing was also that I wanted to make my own movies, and I wanted to get animation back, or I wanted to get animation in the mainstream. And the only way to do it was, I don't know, I didn't know, I didn't have any ideas. So I went back into history, and Disney had actually directed the last feature film in 67 called Jungle Book. And after 67, all of Disney's films, Rescues Down Under, Fox and the Hound, Black Cauldron, and a whole lot of bunch of films actually failed. And animation actually went completely out of favor, completely out of favor. And then it seemed like animation was doomed to actually fail worldwide. Animation would never make a comeback, because it was relegated to something that only children liked. So children wanted to see animation, and that's what it became. But these were the same children actually who belonged to the generation of Steven Spielberg and Robert Zemeckis. And Robert Zemeckis and Spielberg actually had grown up watching Disney's films. And they lamented the fact that animation didn't come back, and animation films were not really coming back. And this is pretty much what echoed what was happening in India at that time. So they came out with a brilliant idea, and they said, how about if we get the adult audiences in, because their key was this. This was, Disney did not make films for children, he made films for adults as well, and for the child in you. And this was the real reason why Disney's films succeeded. So they took this formula, and they decided that they had to kind of do something about it. And that was a unique idea was born, which was called Who Framed Roger Rabbit was the name of the film, which was a live action animation film. So the audience came in to see the star as well as with animation characters, a live action animation combination. And after Who Framed Roger Rabbit, there was no looking back in the animation industry in America and of course the world. Because after Who Framed Roger Rabbit, we had successes, huge successes. We had Aladdin, we had Little Mermaid, we had Space Jam, we had Beauty and the Beast, we had a whole lot of bunch of films. All of them were super duper successes, because all of a sudden animation came back because of Who Framed Roger Rabbit being the film that actually changed everything for them. And that sort of helped me understand that if I have to get my audience into the theaters, really the way, this is what I concurred from whatever was happening looking back at history, is that the only way to get the audience in was to actually reach out to the adults, and reaching out to the adults and reaching out to the stars. And therefore, we conceptualized a film called Toonpur Ka Superhero, and this was one of the earliest sketches that we presented to Ajay Devgan, and we said, this is a film that's going to take you in the land of cartoons, and from there, you will be interacting with cartoons and you will be doing this. And he somehow took fancy to the idea, and he thought the idea was extremely unique, and he had concerns about the execution of the film. Remember, this was very, very early days. Animation was still very, very nascent. It was around 2007, 2008. And many of the people said, it's a foolish idea, it's a great script, but it's a foolish idea, I don't think it's going to work. We don't have the budget, we don't have the people, blah, blah, blah. But because I had done a lot of advertising work in the space, so therefore I knew, okay, this is something that I can actually work on. And for me, I could see the film in my head. And so Toonpur Ka Superhero actually germinated and actually happened. In 2010 December, which is 2011, we released it. It got a great response from the children. And we actually got stars, and we actually got animation back into the business, and we got animation back into the thing. Obviously, subsequently, it hasn't really taken off the way it needed to be taken off due to other issues. But the fact of the matter is that animation came back into the business. And we had interesting characters, and we had the shooting was something which was very interesting as well, because we shot for about 75 days against green screen, and that was one of the biggest sort of things that was a problem with the film, is that how can one actor actually work with a green screen entirely and work on a film that is entirely based on a green screen. So I was just hoping that Ajay Devgan doesn't run away, from the set because he gets bored or something, or he gets fed up afterward. So he was there for about 75 days. We shot with him for 75 days on green screen, another 40 days on a live action set, the regular stuff. And of course, this is how you see the conversion of how the green magically converted into the thing, and you can see the promos, and you can see a lot of stuff online as well as the making of. And eventually, this is what the film looked like. And so it was a very satisfying kind of personal experience, a milestone for me. Now, subsequently, obviously, I did work on a lot of projects, including one of the projects that I'm really proud of is called Komal. Now, Komal is basically a film about a girl who is being sexually abused by her neighbor, and it's a film on child sexual abuse, and for the first time, the film is actually targeted towards children, and that's where the medium of animation actually came in a very, very big way to help me, because such a film in a live action would have been actually gory or gross, and animation as a medium, children became extremely aware, and the important thing is that it became compulsory viewing in schools apart from winning a national award and other things. So this has been shown to 200 million people, 30 countries, 30 languages, 120 countries. UNHCR has declared it as the best film ever made for children in the child sexual abuse space. So this has made a huge impact in society, and there are films like which are equally important and equally this thing, which is on child marriage, like Sisters, and we have films like Education Counts, which was also on child labor. So many such films were done, including a film called Innocence, which was again a film on child abuse, and this was also something that also got a lot of resonance, and this was a message that needed to be getting out immediately. Now, of course, there's enough happening in the animation industry, and I'm happy with the way the animation industry is shaped. We have a lot of indigenous content now, as opposed to when I started off, there was no indigenous content, and I feel that the animation industry is heading into the right direction. There's a lot of players there. I had to reinvent myself into something larger, which is to talk about just films that are about empowerment, and therefore I made this film called Tifa Taj Mahal. It's a great story. It's about a story about a man who actually runs a dhaba, and he asks his customers to teach the children of the village instead of paying for the food. And it's a film on social entrepreneurship, as you may have guessed, and it's a film that obviously has been traveling along the world, going to many, many festivals right now, and getting a lot of great reviews as well. And this is something that is important for us to understand, that those who tell stories rule society. It is a complete no-brainer to understand this, because if you see today, if US is actually the superpower, is a large impact of that is because of the Hollywood films that are coming out from it. And you may have better films coming out from other other spaces as well. You may be having some great Korean cinema, some great Iranian cinema. You may be having some great Indian cinema as well right now. But really, Hollywood is so predominant and Hollywood is so powerful that the narrative is being driven, the world narrative is actually being driven by Hollywood right now. And therefore, a lot of the power that US has right now, the soft power that US has, is actually being because of the story that they are saying. And we are in a position, because of our treasure chest of stories that we have, we are in a position to actually unlock that and actually move forward. And I'm hoping that we will recognize that in ourselves. At the end of the day, I'd like to say that we're all telling stories to ourselves, about ourselves as well. And in the end, obviously, make sure that you have a story that counts. Yeah, thank you.